I only stopped at the hospice for a favor, but the dying stranger grabbed my wrist with a strength that defied his failing body. His skin felt like ice against mine, and the sharp scent of antiseptic filled the air. He whispered my husband's name as if he had tasted it before. Then he shoved a cold metal key into my palm and choked out 6 words that shattered my life. "Your husband is having an affair. My name is Myreth Ashmere, and until 2 o'clock this afternoon, I believed my life was a sturdy, weatherproof structure. I believed in the solid oak of my front door and the reliable warmth of the man who slept beside me every night. I was wrong. The foundation had rotted away long ago, and I was the only one who had not noticed the floor sinking beneath my feet. It started with a favor, the kind of trivial, polite gesture that usually barely registers in memory. I was at Renfall Hospice in Briar Glen, a town that always seemed to be covered in a thin layer of gray mist. Regardless of the season, I was not a volunteer. Not really. I was merely the courier for one. My colleague, Sarah, had come down with a sudden flu and had begged me to drop off the quarterly donation compliance forms for the hospice administration. It was a 20-minute detour from my usual route home, a minor inconvenience that I had accepted with a smile. The facility smelled of aggressive cleanliness. Beneath the top notes of lemon furniture polish and industrial floor wax lay the heavier, sweeter scent of decaying flowers and failing organs. It was the smell of a place where people came to wait for the end. I clutched the manila envelope to my chest, my heels clicking too loudly on the polished linoleum. I felt like an intruder in this sanctuary of silence. My vibrant red coat felt obscene against the pale beige walls. I wanted to deliver the papers to the front desk and leave. I wanted to get back to my car, turn up the heat, and listen to a podcast about anything other than mortality. I had just handed the paperwork to a distracted receptionist and turned to leave when I heard it. It was not a shout. It was a rasp, a sound like dry leaves being crushed under a heavy boot, but it carried an impossible clarity. Myreth Ashmere. I froze. The sound of my own full name, spoken in this place where I was a stranger, felt like a violation. I turned slowly. The hallway was mostly empty, save for a cart of linens parked near the nurse's station. The voice had come from the room directly to my left, the door standing slightly ajar. Logic told me to keep walking. Logic told me that perhaps someone else shared my name, or that I had misheard. But curiosity is a treacherous instinct. I stepped toward the doorway, peering into the semi-darkness of the room. The man in the bed looked less like a human being and more like a biological machine that was running out of fuel. He was skeletal, his skin the color of old parchment, stretched tight over the sharp angles of his cheekbones. Tubes snaked from his arms and nose, tethering him to the bank of monitors that beeped with a rhythmic, indifferent cadence. He should have been asleep, or comatose, but his eyes were open. They were terrifyingly awake. They were blue, a piercing, watery blue that locked onto mine with a desperate, predatory intensity. He was not looking at me. He was looking into me. "Come here," he wheezed. It was not a request. I should have called a nurse. I should have backed away. Instead, I found myself stepping into the room, drawn by a gravity I could not explain. "Do I know you?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly in the sterile air. He did not answer. He lifted a hand, the movement jerky and uncoordinated. His fingers were stained with something dark, his nails varying shades of purple and blue from poor circulation. He reached out, his hand hovering in the air, trembling. "Myreth," he said again, "closer." I moved within reach, driven by a foolish, polite need to comfort a dying man. I thought perhaps he mistook me for a daughter or a wife. I reached out to gently lower his hand back to the bedsheet. The moment my skin brushed his, he lunged. His grip was shocking. It was the hysterical strength of the terminal, a burst of adrenaline from a body that had nothing left to lose. His fingers clamped around my wrist like iron bands, his skin icy and damp. I gasped, trying to pull back, but he yanked me down, forcing me to bend over the rail of the bed until my face was inches from his. I could smell him then, the metallic tang of old blood, the sourness of sweat, and the chemical reek of medication. "Listen to me," he hissed, his breath hot against my ear. "Listen." "Let go," I stammered, panic finally piercing through my confusion. "Sir, please let go. You're hurting me." He ignored my plea. He pulled me closer, his eyes widening until I could see the red veins mapping the whites. "Your husband," he choked out. "Connor Whitfall." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Hearing Connor's name in this room was more jarring than hearing my own. "He is having an affair." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. My first reaction was a defensive, almost violent rejection. It was the reflex of a woman who had been happily married for 8 years. Connor. Who texted me every day at noon, Connor. Who was currently at home in Cedar Vale, probably prepping vegetables for the stew he had promised to make. "You're confused," I said, my voice hardening. I tried to pry his fingers off my wrist, but his grip was relentless. "You don't know my husband. You're medicated. Please, let me go." The man let out a dry, rattling sound that might have been a laugh. "I know him," he whispered. "I know he stands in your kitchen in the dark. I know about the third tile." I stopped struggling. My breath hitched in my throat. "The third tile under the refrigerator," he rasped, his eyes never leaving mine. "The one with the hairline crack shaped like a lightning bolt. He stares at it when he talks on the phone. And the blue mug. The one you use for tea. The one with the chip on the rim that cuts your lip if you aren't careful." A cold sensation, far colder than the man's hand, washed down my spine. Nobody knew about the crack in the tile. It was hidden deep in the shadow of the appliance. I only knew it because I had dropped an earring there 6 months ago. And the mug that was my private annoyance, a sentimental piece I refused to throw away. "Who are you?" I whispered, the fight draining out of me. He did not answer. Instead, his other hand fumbled under the heavy blanket. He pulled something out, his movements frantic, hurried. He jammed a small, hard object into the palm of my trapped hand and forced my fingers closed over it. "Take it," he commanded. "Don't let them see." I could feel the biting edges of metal against my skin. "E17, he said. "Remember that, E17. "What is this?" I asked, my voice rising in hysteria. "Why are you doing this?" He pulled me down one last time, straining his neck muscles, his face twisting in pain. "Don't go home alone tonight," he begged. "And listen to me. Mireth, listen closely." He paused, sucking in a breath that sounded like it was being pulled through broken glass. "If you ask him directly," he whispered, the words hitting me with the force of a physical blow, "you will become the guilty one. He will spin it. He will make you the villain. Do not ask. Watch." Suddenly, the door burst open. "Mr. Rusk," a nurse in blue scrubs rushed in, her face a mask of professional alarm. She was followed by an orderly. "Ma'am, you need to step back. You can't be in here." The distraction broke the man's focus. His grip on my wrist loosened just enough. I ripped my hand away, stumbling back into the wall. I clutched my fist to my chest, hiding the object he had given me. The nurse was over him instantly, checking the monitors, adjusting the oxygen flow. "His heart rate is spiking," she shouted to the orderly. "Get the crash cart, just in case, although he's DNR." The man on the bed slumped back against the pillows. The ferocious energy that had animated him moments ago evaporated, leaving only a husk. But his eyes found mine one last time across the room. There was no malice in them anymore, only a profound, terrifying pity. "Don't go home alone tonight." The beeping of the monitor accelerated, beep, 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 and then, with a sound that I knew would haunt my nightmares forever, it smoothed out into a single, high-pitched tone. The nurse sighed, her shoulders slumping. She looked at her watch. Time of death, 2:14 p.m. It was over. Just like that. A life ended in the time it took me to catch my breath. "Ma'am." The nurse turned to me, her expression softening into practiced sympathy. "I am so sorry you had to see that. He was very agitated near the end. Sometimes the medication causes hallucinations." Hallucinations, I repeated, my voice hollow. Yes, he didn't hurt you. Did he? She looked at my wrist. I looked down. There were red welts forming where his fingers had dug in, distinct and angry against my pale skin. But that was not what made my stomach turn. Smudged across the back of my hand and onto my palm was a stain of vibrant, deep purple ink. It looked like he had been holding a stamp, or perhaps had dipped his hand in something before I arrived. It was not blood. It was deliberate, a mark. I'm fine, I lied. I needed to get out. I needed to breathe air that didn't taste of death and secrets. I need to go. Of course, the nurse said, already turning back to the body to begin the grim work of post-mortem care. Take your time. I fled. I walked fast, bordering on a run, down the corridor. I pushed through the double doors and out into the gray afternoon light of Briar Glen. I sucked in the damp air, trying to steady my shaking hands. I opened my clenched fist. Resting in my palm was a small, silver key. It was the kind you see for gym lockers or train station storage. Attached to it by a flimsy wire ring was a scrap of paper, torn from the corner of a magazine. On it, in shaky, jagged ballpoint pen, was written E17. I looked at the purple stain on my hand again. I rubbed it with my thumb, spitting on it to try and wipe it away. But the ink was stubborn. It clung to my skin like a bruise. I looked back at the hospice entrance through the glass sliding doors. From where I stood, I could see the nurse's station. I saw the nurse who had been in the room walk out to the whiteboard where the patient names were listed. With a quick, efficient swipe of an eraser, she wiped the line for room 304 clean. It happened so fast, too fast. Usually, there is a pause, a moment of respect, but the name was gone before the body was even cold. I realized then that I didn't even know his name. The nurse had said, Mr. Rusk, but I hadn't caught the first name, and now, looking at that blank white space on the board, I felt a surge of paranoia that didn't belong to the Myreth Ashmere of this morning. Why did he have ink on his hand? Why did he know about the crack in my kitchen tile? And why, God, why did he tell me that my Connor was dangerous? If you ask him directly, you will become the guilty one. I stood in the parking lot, the key biting into my palm, the engine of my car waiting silent and cold. I was supposed to go home. I was supposed to walk into my kitchen, kiss my husband, and tell him about the sad thing that happened at the hospice. But as I looked at the purple stain on my skin, I knew I couldn't. The Myreth who could do that had died in that room along with the stranger. The woman standing in the parking lot was someone else entirely, and she was terrified. Driving back to Cedar Vale felt less like a commute and more like a migration between two different planets. The frantic, antiseptic terror of the hospice faded into the rearview mirror, replaced by the manicured lawns and colonial-style facades of my neighborhood. This was the sanctuary we had built. The mortgage was auto-paid from our joint account. The hydrangeas were pruned by a service every second Tuesday, and the neighbors waved with the casual, disinterested friendliness that defines modern suburbia. I pulled into the driveway, the tires crunching softly on the gravel. The motion sensor floodlight above the garage flicked on, bathing my car in a harsh, clinical white glow. Usually, this light made me feel safe, a technological sentry guarding our domestic bliss. Tonight, it felt like an interrogation lamp. I sat in the car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The key, the little silver locker key with the jagged E17 tag, was burning a hole in my pocket. I had transferred it from my coat to my jeans, needing to feel its edges against my thigh to confirm that the afternoon had actually happened. I checked my face in the rearview mirror. I looked the same. Same dark circles under the eyes from a week of poor sleep. Same lipstick slightly worn off in the center. It was terrifying how ordinary trauma could look from the outside. I unlocked the front door and was immediately hit by the smell of rosemary and roasting chicken. It was a wholesome, aggressive scent of home. Myreth, is that you? Connor's voice floated from the kitchen. It was warm, steady, the voice of a man who had nothing to hide. It was the voice I fell in love with 10 years ago. Yeah, I called back, my voice sounding thin and reedy to my own ears. It's me. I walked into the kitchen. Connor was standing by the island, chopping vegetables. He was wearing the gray sweater I had bought him for Christmas. The sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked up and smiled that easy, crinkling smile that usually melted the stress of my workday. Hey, he said, setting the knife down and wiping his hands on a towel. He walked over and kissed me on the cheek. His lips were warm. You're late. Everything okay? How was the hospice run? The lie formed in my throat, tasting like ash. It was fine, I said. Just traffic. You know how the bridge gets at 5. Tell me about it, he laughed, turning back to the stove. I opened a bottle of the Pinot Noir. Pour yourself a glass. You look like you need it. I watched his back as he stirred the sauce. He was so relaxed. His shoulders were loose, his movements fluid. How could a man look this at ease if his life was a lie? Or was that the trick? Was the comfort? Just a costume he put on when he walked through the door. I walked to the sink, needing to put distance between us. I'm just going to wash up, I said. In the downstairs powder room, I locked the door and turned the faucet to scalding hot. I pumped the soap dispenser 3 times, lathering my hands aggressively. I looked at my right palm. The purple ink stain was still there. A smudge shaped like a crescent moon near the base of my thumb. It was faint but undeniable. I scrubbed at it with my fingernails, scratching until the skin turned raw and red, but the purple tint remained. It was lodged in the creases of my fingerprints. It felt like a brand, a mark of complicity. I dried my hands on the plush Egyptian cotton towel monogrammed, of course, and stared at myself in the mirror. If you ask him directly, you will become the guilty one. The stranger's voice echoed in the small tiled room. I took a deep breath, composed my face into a mask of tiredness, and went back out. Dinner was an exercise in surrealism. We sat at the small round table in the breakfast nook. Connor talked about his day. Something about a supply chain issue with one of his clients. He ran a boutique logistics consulting firm, or so the story went. I nodded at the right intervals, made the appropriate noises of sympathy and agreement, but I was not really there. I was watching his phone. It sat on the table next to his wine glass. Face down. It always sat face down. I had never thought anything of it before. It was just manners. Right, paying attention to your spouse. But then it buzzed. A short, sharp vibration against the wood. Connor didn't look at it immediately. He finished chewing a bite of chicken, swallowed, and then, with a motion so smooth it must have been rehearsed 1,000 times, he slid his hand over the phone. He didn't lift it. He just tilted it slightly, creating a tiny angle that only he could see. Checked the screen, and then flipped it back down flat. Work, I asked. The word felt heavy on my tongue. Just a spam notification, he said, smiling. Ignore it. He didn't unlock it. He didn't swipe it away. He just knew. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at the kitchen floor, my eyes tracing the pattern of the tiles until they reached the refrigerator. I leaned slightly to the left. There it was, the 3rd tile. The hairline crack shaped like a lightning bolt, barely visible in the shadow of the appliance. I felt like I was falling. The stranger hadn't been guessing. He had been here, in this kitchen, standing where I was sitting right now. You're quiet tonight, Connor said, pouring more wine into my glass. Is the work piling up at Harrow and Pines? The mention of my company made me flinch. Harrow and Pines Solutions. I was a mid-level compliance officer. I dealt with bids, municipal contracts, and liability clauses. It was boring, meticulous work. Why would that matter? If you ask him directly, you will become the guilty one. The warning took on a new, terrifying shape. My signature was on thousands of documents. My digital footprint was all over the approval systems. If Connor was doing something illegal, and if he was smart and God, he was smart, he wouldn't use his own name. Just a long audit? I lied again. I was getting better at it. My eyes are tired. Well, Connor said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I had to force myself not to recoil. I have an idea. I was thinking we should head up to the cabin this weekend. Just the two of us. Disconnect. We haven't been up to the lake in months. The cabin. Our retreat. It was 2 hours north. Isolated. Surrounded by dense pine forest. Usually, the suggestion would thrill me. Tonight, it sounded like the opening line of a horror movie. That sounds nice, I said. Great, he beamed. I'll handle the packing. You just finish your week. After dinner, while Connor cleaned up, he always insisted on cleaning up if he cooked. I retreated to the living room with my laptop. I told him I had a few emails to finish. I sat on the beige sectional, the laptop screen shielding me. I didn't open my work email. I opened our bank portal. We had a joint account for household expenses and separate personal accounts for discretionary spending. We were modern, transparent, or so I thought. I logged into the joint account first. Normal, mortgage, utilities, grocery bills. Then I clicked on the Transfer History tab. I scrolled back 3 months, then 6. There were withdrawals, not large ones, no massive red flags that would trigger a fraud alert, just steady drips. $200 here, $350 there. All cash withdrawals from ATMs. I cross-referenced the dates with my calendar. Every single withdrawal coincided with days Connor said he was on site with a client or running late. I looked at the locations of the ATMs. They weren't in the city center where his office was. They were clustered in a pattern. A gas station on Route 9, a convenience store near the highway exit, and 3 separate withdrawals from a bank branch in Rookmere. Rookmere. I stared at the name. It was a dying industrial town 40 miles west. It was nowhere near his usual client base. It was a place you went to if you wanted to buy used auto parts or cheap antique furniture. Why was Connor pulling cash in Rookmere on a Tuesday afternoon when he was supposed to be in a meeting downtown? What you looking at? I jumped, slamming the laptop shut a little too hard. Connor was standing right behind the sofa, drying a wine glass with a cloth. He hadn't made a sound on the carpet. Just looking at a dress, I said, my heart rate spiking to 120. For the office party next month. You should get it, he said, walking around to sit next to me. He draped an arm around my shoulders. The weight of his limb felt heavy, oppressive. You look beautiful in everything. I leaned into him because that is what a wife does. I smelled his cologne, the cedar and spice scent I used to inhale greedily. Now, underneath it, I imagined I could smell the metallic tang of secrets. I'm tired, I whispered. I think I'm going to head up. Go ahead, he said, kissing my temple. I'll be up in a bit, just going to check the locks. I went upstairs, my legs feeling like lead. In the bedroom, I undressed in the dark. I took the key from my jeans pocket and hid it inside the small velvet pouch where I kept my grandmother's pearl earrings. Tucked deep in the back of my jewelry box, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan slicing through the shadows. 10 minutes later, Connor came in. He stripped down to his boxers and climbed in beside me. The mattress dipped under his weight. He shifted, settling in, and draped an arm over my waist, pulling me backward against his chest. Spooning. It was our position. It was intimate. Protective. Now I felt like a hostage. His breathing slowed, deepening into the rhythm of sleep. I lay there, eyes wide open in the dark. I listened to the house settling the groans of the timber, the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. The stranger's words replayed in my mind on an endless loop. Your husband is having an affair. But it wasn't just an affair. Men having affairs don't inspire dying strangers to leave ink marks on women's hands. Men having affairs don't have people tracking the cracks in their kitchen tiles. This was something else. This was something that required cash withdrawals in Rookmere and hidden keys and terrified whispers in a hospice room. I felt the steady thump of Connor's heart against my back. It was a calm, powerful rhythm. It was the heartbeat of a man who slept the sleep of the just, or the sleep of the sociopath. I realized then, with a clarity that froze the blood in my veins, that I had no idea who was sleeping in my bed. I knew his coffee order. I knew he was allergic to penicillin. I knew he hated horror movies, but I didn't know him. The man breathing against my neck was a stranger, and unlike the stranger in the hospice, this one wasn't dying. This one was strong, healthy, and lying right behind me. I closed my eyes, but sleep was a country I couldn't visit tonight. I lay awake, waiting for the sun. While the purple stain on my palm throbbed like a fresh wound, I had to find out what was in locker E17. But more importantly, I had to figure out how to survive the man whose arm was currently draped lovingly across my chest. The next morning, I called in late to work. It was the first time in 3 years I had deviated from my schedule without a pre-approved leave form. I told my supervisor I had a dental emergency, a lie that tasted surprisingly natural on my tongue. Deception, it seemed, was a muscle that grew stronger with rapid use. I did not go to the dentist. Instead, I drove back to Briar Glen, navigating the winding roads with a singular, vibrating focus. The morning light made Renfall Hospice look different than it had in the gray afternoon gloom. It looked benign, almost cheerful, with sunlight glinting off the automatic glass doors. But as I stepped inside, the smell hit me again, that cloying mix of floor wax and decay, and my stomach twisted. I walked up to the front desk. The receptionist was different from yesterday. This one was younger, with bright pink acrylic nails that clicked rhythmically against her keyboard. She did not look up immediately. "Can I help you?" she asked, her eyes still glued to the monitor. "Hi," I said, trying to project the harried energy of a forgetful volunteer. "I was here yesterday dropping off some paperwork for Sarah. I think I left my scarf in one of the rooms. It is a blue cashmere one. My husband will kill me if I lost it." The lie about the husband felt like a dare. "Which room?" she asked, finally looking at me. "Room 304, I said. "The gentleman who passed away yesterday afternoon." The typing stopped. The girl frowned, her forehead crinkling. She tapped a few keys, backspaced, and tapped again. 304, she repeated. "Yes, Mr. Rusk," I said, testing the name the nurse had used. "I don't show a Mr. Rusk in 304, she said slowly. "That room is listed as vacant for cleaning since Monday." A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning swept over me. "That's impossible," I said, leaning over the high counter. "I was there. I saw him. He died at 2:14 yesterday." "Ma'am, the system says vacant," she said, her voice taking on a defensive edge. She turned the monitor slightly away, but not before I caught a glimpse of the log. It was a standard patient management interface, rows of gray and white text, but on the line for room 304, there was a red flag icon and a timestamp that read 0800 hours this morning. Beside it, in the action column, was the word purge followed by an administrator code. Someone had not just discharged him, they had scrubbed him. "Maybe I got the room number wrong," I said quickly, backing down before she could get suspicious. "I'll check the lost and found later. Actually, while I'm here, could you point me to the visitor lockers? I might have left it there when I used the restroom." "Down the hall, past the vending machines. Turn left," she said, dismissing me with a wave of her pink nails. I walked away, my heart thudding against my ribs. Purge. You don't purge a patient record unless you are trying to erase a liability or a life. The locker room was a narrow, windowless alcove that smelled of damp coats and stale coffee. One wall was lined with gray metal lockers, the kind you see in high schools or gyms. I scanned the numbers: E15, E16, E17. It was a small square locker at eye level. I pulled the silver key from my pocket. My hand shook, the metal scraping against the lock plate before sliding in. I turned it. Click. The door swung open with a rusty squeak. The locker was mostly empty. There was no coat, no shoes, no personal effects that define a human existence. Just 3 items resting on the dusty metal floor. A manila envelope, thin and unsealed, a USB drive, black, scuffed, looking like it had spent years in a pocket with loose change, and a single sheet of lined notebook paper, folded in half. I grabbed them all and shoved them into my oversized tote bag. I didn't dare look at them here. I slammed the locker shut and walked out, keeping my head down, bypassing the reception desk and practically running to my car. I drove 3 towns over, to a strip mall in a suburb where I knew no one. I parked behind a dry cleaner, the engine idling, and pulled the items out onto the passenger seat. I opened the note first. The handwriting was jagged, erratic, the script of a man whose motor control was failing. If you are reading this, it means I have lost to him. I tried to build a case, but he owns the paper trail. Do not trust the law. The law reads what he writes. No signature, just the terrifying finality of a dead man's resignation. I picked up the envelope. My fingers felt numb. I slid the contents out. They were photographs, real photographs, printed on glossy paper. Not digital prints. They looked grainy, taken in low light with a high ISO. Likely from a long-distance lens. The perspective was voyeuristic shots taken through car windows, from across streets, from behind bushes. The first photo showed a parking lot at night. I recognized the location. It was the back lot of a steakhouse in downtown Cedar Vale, a place Connor and I went for anniversaries. But Connor wasn't with me. He was standing next to a black sedan. He was leaning against the car, arms crossed, looking relaxed. But it was the way he looked that stopped my breath. He didn't look like the gentle, domestic husband who made soup. He looked sharp, predatory. He was wearing a suit I had never seen, a charcoal gray cut that looked significantly more expensive than his usual work attire. Facing him was a woman. She was tall, with blonde hair pulled back in a severe, sleek ponytail. She was handing him a thick document folder. She didn't look like a mistress. She looked like a business partner, or perhaps an accomplice. Her face was partially turned away, but her posture screamed tension. I shuffled to the next photo. This one was taken in a park, on a bench. Connor again, the blonde woman again, and a third person. I brought the photo closer to my face. The third man was sitting on the other end of the bench, his body angled toward Connor. He was wearing a baseball cap and a heavy jacket. His face mostly in shadow, but I recognized the slump of the shoulders. I recognized the way his hands rested on his knees, fingers curled inward. It was the man from the hospice. He looked healthier here, more flesh on his bones, less gray in his skin, but it was him, Gideon. That was the name I had heard in my head, though I wasn't sure where it came from yet. The man who died holding my hand had sat on a park bench with my husband. They knew each other. It wasn't just observation. It was a meeting. I stared at the image. The dead man looked like he was pleading. Connor looked like he was negotiating, and the blonde woman looked like she was recording the minutes of a catastrophe. I looked at the USB drive sitting on the seat. It was small, innocuous, yet it radiated threat. If I plugged this into my laptop at home, would Connor know if he had purged the hospice records? Did he have spyware on our Wi-Fi? Did he monitor the keystrokes on our devices? He owns the paper trail. I couldn't view it, not yet, not on anything connected to my name. I put everything back into the envelope. I needed a hiding place, not the jewelry box. That was too cliché. And Connor might check it if he was looking for an anniversary gift. I needed somewhere boring, somewhere invisible. I drove home, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror every 10 seconds. The house was empty. Connor was at work. I ran upstairs to the guest room closet. On the top shelf, behind a stack of old linens, was my mother's old Danish butter cookie tin. It didn't contain cookies. It contained sewing supplies, spools of thread, rusty needles, a tomato-shaped pincushion. It was the quintessential artifact of domestic boredom. Connor never sewed. He never replaced a button. To him, this tin was part of the background noise of our marriage. I lifted the plastic tray of threads and slid the envelope and the USB drive underneath it, pressing them flat against the bottom of the tin. I replaced the tray and the lid. It looked perfectly innocent. I made it to Harrow and Pine Solutions by 11:30. I blamed the dentist, complained about a phantom root canal, and buried myself in my cubicle. My job was dull. I reviewed compliance bids for municipal infrastructure projects. I checked boxes. I verified that dates matched and signatures were valid. It was a world of bureaucracy where the biggest thrill was finding a typo in a clause regarding cement density. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I jumped, knocking my stapler off the desk. Tessa Rayner was leaning against the partition of my cubicle, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. Tessa was the closest thing I had to a friend here. She was sharp-tongued, cynical, and had an uncanny ability to spot a lie at 50 paces. "God, Tessa, don't sneak up on me," I breathed, pressing a hand to my chest. "I didn't sneak. You're just zoned out," she said, handing me one of the coffees. "Hazelnut? Extra sugar? You look like you need the dopamine." I took the cup, the warmth seeping into my cold hands. "Just the dentist," I muttered. "Novocaine makes me jumpy." Tessa narrowed her eyes. She didn't buy it, but she didn't push. She pulled up a chair and sat down. "So, are you going to tell me why you've been staring at the same page of the intersection bid for 20 minutes? You haven't scrolled once." I looked at her. Tessa worked in internal audit. She knew how systems worked. She knew how people got caught. "Tessa," I said, keeping my voice low, below the hum of the office ventilation, "I have a hypothetical question." "I love hypotheticals," she said, taking a sip of her coffee. "Usually they involve murder or tax evasion. Which one is it?" I didn't smile. If someone wanted to frame an employee, say, for something big, corporate fraud, or bid rigging, where would they start? Tessa's playful demeanor vanished. She looked at me over the rim of her cup, her dark eyes assessing. "Is this about the Anderson file because I told you? That discrepancy wasn't your fault." "No, not a specific file. Just in general. If you were a bad actor, and you wanted to set someone up to take the fall for a massive scheme, how would you do it?" Tessa set her cup down. She leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a whisper. "Well, you don't start with the money. Money is easy to trace, but also easy to explain away. Oh, it was a clerical error. No, if you want to nail someone, you start with identity." "Identity?" I asked. "You create a pattern of behavior," she explained. "You use their login to access files at odd hours. You send emails from their drafts folder. But the kill shot, it's the signature." The blood drained from my face. "The signature," I echoed. "Yeah," Tessa said. "Digital or physical, if your name is on the approval line, you own the decision. It doesn't matter if you didn't read it. It doesn't matter if someone slid the page into a stack of 50 other papers you were signing on a Friday afternoon. If your signature is there, the intent is presumed. Why? If you ask him directly, you will become the guilty one." The warning from the dead man finally clicked into place with the precision of a bolt sliding into a lock. I thought about the nights Connor brought me tax documents to sign while I was cooking dinner. I thought about the times he asked me to sign for packages I hadn't ordered. I thought about the electronic signature pad he had set up on our home computer for ease of banking. "Mireth?" Tessa touched my arm. "You're shaking." "I'm fine," I said, pulling away. "Just chilly. The AC is strong today." "You're not fine," Tessa said softly. "But I won't pry. Just be careful. If you think someone is messing with your credentials, change your passwords. Today." I nodded, but I knew passwords wouldn't save me. I turned back to my screen, staring at the innocent-looking compliance form. At the bottom of the screen was my digital approval stamp, Mireth Ashmere. It looked so official, so authoritative. I realized with a sick lurch that I wasn't just a wife who was being cheated on. I was a patsy, a scapegoat. Connor wasn't just hiding a mistress. He was building a coffin for me, constructed out of paper and ink, and he had been handing me the nails to hammer it shut for years. I looked at my hand, the one that had held the dying man's grip. The purple ink was gone, scrubbed away by aggressive washing, but the sensation of his cold skin lingered. "Start with the things that have your signature." I opened my drawer and took out a red pen. I didn't know the rules of this game yet, but I knew one thing: I was done signing blindly. From this moment on, every piece of paper that crossed my desk, or my kitchen table, was going to be treated like a confession. Surveillance is not a skill you are born with. It is a callus you develop from friction. A defensive habit formed when the ground beneath you stops feeling solid. I used to be the kind of woman who felt guilty if I accidentally glanced at my husband's phone screen when a notification popped up. Now, 3 days after the man died in the hospice, I was tracking Connor with the cold, detached precision of a predator. I did not hire a private investigator yet. I did not want another stranger holding the pieces of my life before I understood the picture myself. Instead, I used the tools of modern convenience that we had so willingly invited into our lives. On Tuesday morning, I called Connor's car dealership, pretending to be his executive assistant. I claimed we needed the mileage logs for tax purposes and asked if they could pull the cloud data from the onboard navigation system. They emailed me a spreadsheet within 15 minutes. It was terrifyingly easy. I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of cold coffee forgotten near my elbow, and traced the lines of his life. Most of the entries were innocuous: the office downtown, the gym on 4th Street, the grocery store. But there was a recurring anomaly. Every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 4 months, between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the car was parked at a location in Rookmere. The address was not a hotel. It was not a restaurant. It was 12 Larkstone Court. Rookmere was a grim, industrial satellite town, a place of corrugated metal warehouses and cracked pavement. It was the last place on earth Connor Whitfall, a man who color-coordinated his socks, would voluntarily visit, unless he had a reason to be invisible. I waited until he left for work. Then I called in sick to Harrow and Pines. My lie was smoother this time. I dressed in nondescript clothes, gray sweatpants, a dark hoodie, sunglasses. I took my old sedan, the one we kept for hauling gardening supplies, the one Connor never looked at. The drive to Rookmere took 45 minutes. The landscape shifted from the manicured green of Cedar Vale to the rusted browns and grays of the industrial belt. Larkstone Court turned out to be a small, nondescript office complex tucked behind a defunct textile factory. It was quiet, the kind of place where shell companies went to die. I parked 3 rows back, wedged between a dumpster and a delivery van. I had a clear view of the entrance to number 12. At 2:15, Connor's silver Audi pulled into the lot. Seeing him here, in this desolate setting, made my stomach turn. He stepped out of the car. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, just his crisp white dress shirt and tie. He looked around, scanning the parking lot with a vigilance that I now recognized as practiced paranoia. He checked his watch. 5 minutes later, a black luxury sedan pulled up next to him. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. My breath hitched, but not for the reason I expected. I was braced for a younger version of myself, or perhaps the cliched secretary type. But the woman standing opposite my husband was nothing like that. She was striking. Yes, but in a severe, architectural way. She had hair the color of polished steel, cut into a sharp bob that framed a face devoid of softness. She wore a tailored navy power suit that probably cost more than my first car. This was not a romantic rendezvous. There was no touching, no lingering glances. There was only the stiff, charged body language of a high-stakes negotiation. Her name, I would later learn, was Sloane Merritt, but in that moment, she was just the unknown variable that was dismantling my marriage. I watched through my sunglasses as Connor opened his trunk. He pulled out a thick, padded envelope. It was heavy. I could see the strain in his forearm muscles as he lifted it. He handed it to Sloane. She didn't open it. She weighed it in her hand, gave a curt nod, and then reached into her own briefcase. She handed him a folder. It was transparent plastic, held shut by a distinctive bright red clip. Connor took the folder and flipped through it right there in the parking lot. He stopped on a page, pointed at something, and said something that made Sloane stiffen. She shook her head, gesturing sharply at the building behind them. They walked together toward the entrance of number 12. As the glass door swung open, I saw the directory plaque on the wall. It was modest, brass letters on black slate. Whitfall Advisory. The air left my lungs in a rush. Whitfall, my husband's last name, my last name. I had been married to Connor for 8 years. I knew every asset we owned, I knew about his logistics consulting job at a firm downtown. I knew about our retirement accounts. I had never, not once, heard of a company called Whitfall Advisory. They disappeared inside. I sat in the hot car, sweat trickling down my spine, my mind racing. An affair would have been simple. An affair is flesh and blood and betrayal. This was paperwork. This was infrastructure. This was a separate life built on a foundation of concrete and lies. I waited for an hour. When they emerged, the red-clipped folder was gone. Connor looked relieved, almost buoyant. Sloane looked grim. They shook hands, a formal, businesslike shake, and parted ways. I drove home in a daze. The image of that brass sign burned into my retinas. That evening, the house felt like a stage set. I was the actor who had forgotten her lines. Connor came home at 6:30, whistling. He tossed his keys in the bowl, kissed me on the forehead, and asked what was for dinner. "Pasta," I said, my voice steady. "I made the sauce you like." We ate in the kitchen. The normalcy of it was grotesque. He talked about a difficult client at his logistics firm, spinning a tale about a shipping container stuck in Rotterdam. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie because at 2:30 in the afternoon, when he claimed to be on a conference call with the Dutch Port Authority, he was standing in a parking lot in Rookmere handing a package to a woman in a navy suit. "Connor," I said, setting my fork down. I needed to push, just a little. "I was reading an article today about small businesses. It made me wonder, have you ever thought about branching out? Starting your own firm?" He didn't freeze. He didn't choke. He just chewed his pasta, swallowed, and took a sip of water. "Funny you should ask," he said, wiping his mouth. "I have toyed with the idea. Maybe doing some freelance consulting on the side. Why?" "I don't know," I shrugged, forcing a smile. "I just think you're talented. You could call it, I don't know, Whitfall Consulting, Whitfall Advisory." I watched his eyes. For a fraction of a second, the pupil dilated, a microscopic flinch, but then the mask was back in place. "Whitfall Advisory," he chuckled, testing the name. "Sounds a bit pretentious, doesn't it? Maybe one day, right now, I have enough on my plate just keeping the current bosses happy." He stood up and began clearing the plates. "How about we watch a movie tonight? I'm exhausted." He was good. He was terrifyingly good. If I hadn't seen the sign with my own eyes, I would have believed him. Later that night, while he was in the shower, I opened my laptop. I didn't go to Google. I went to the Secretary of State's business entity search. I typed in Whitfall Advisory. The result popped up instantly. Entity name: Whitfall Advisory, LLC, status active, incorporation date, 18 months ago, registered agent Larkstone Holdings. I clicked on the filing history. I expected to see Connor's name as the manager or officer, but his name was nowhere. The manager was listed as a Marcus Vane. I had never heard of a Marcus Vane. But the principal office address was 12 Larkstone Court, Rookmere. It was a shell, a company using his name but hiding his signature. Why would you name a company after yourself if you were trying to hide? Unless the name wasn't for vanity, unless the name was for legitimacy, or for blame. Start with the things that have your signature. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I closed the browser and wiped the history just as the shower water turned off. I couldn't stay in the bedroom. I needed to see what was in the envelope from the hospice locker. I had been too afraid to look at the rest of the contents, focusing only on the photos. But now, the pieces were moving too fast. I went into the guest room, retrieved the sewing tin, and took out the manila envelope. I bypassed the photos of Connor and Sloane. I dug deeper. At the very bottom of the envelope, stuck between two pieces of cardboard, was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a handwritten note like the first one. It was a photocopy of a typed memo. It looked like an internal email or a draft document, but the headers had been blacked out. There was a paragraph highlighted in yellow marker. The ink was faded, but the words were sharp enough to slice through me. The liability structure for the Project Alpha expansion requires a firewall. The primary signatory for the shell accounts cannot be a direct beneficiary of the funds. We recommend utilizing a localized proxy with a clean credit history and existing verified credentials within the current household. M.A. possesses the necessary clearance levels and lack of financial oversight. Myreth Ashmere will be the perfect scapegoat. I read it 3 times. Myreth Ashmere will be the perfect scapegoat. The room seemed to tilt. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't just about hiding assets. They were planning to pin something on me. Project Alpha. Liability structure. I thought about the tax forms Connor had asked me to sign last month. I thought about the insurance updates he had been so insistent on. I thought about the way he had encouraged me to keep my job at Harrow and Pines. Even though he made enough for both of us, my job gave me verified credentials. My job made me a credible fall guy for corporate fraud. The affair was a distraction. Sloane Merritt wasn't his mistress. She was his architect. She was helping him build a prison cell, and they were going to lock me inside it and throw away the key. I shoved the paper back into the tin and shoved the tin back onto the shelf. My hands were trembling so hard I almost knocked over a vase. I walked back to the master bedroom. Connor was in bed, reading a book. He looked up and smiled, patting the space beside him. "Everything okay?" he asked. "You were in there for a while." "Just organizing some old clothes," I said. I climbed into bed. I lay down next to the man who had discussed making me a scapegoat in a typed memo. "Good night, Myreth," he said softly, turning off the lamp. "Good night," I whispered. In the dark, I stared at his silhouette. The fear was gone. It had burned away, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. Gideon Rusk had warned me that asking questions would make me guilty. He was right. Innocence was no longer an option. If Connor wanted a war, he was going to get one, but he wouldn't be fighting the Myreth Ashmere he thought he knew. That woman was gone. The woman lying next to him now was the one holding the evidence, and she was ready to burn the whole house down. The name haunted me. Rusk. I had heard the nurse shout it in the panic of the code blue. "Mr. Rusk. But a last name is not a person. It is just a label in a file." To understand why a dying man would spend his final breath trying to save me. I needed the rest of him. I needed to know who he was before he became a skeleton in a hospital bed. I returned to Renfall Hospice early Wednesday morning, but I did not go inside. I knew the reception would be a dead end. The digital purge I had witnessed yesterday made that clear. Instead, I sat in my car in the visitor lot, scrolling through the local county obituary database on my phone. I filtered for deaths in the last 48 hours. I filtered for the last name Rusk. There was only one hit. Gideon Rusk, aged 62, passed away peacefully at Renfall Hospice. Peacefully. The word made me want to scream. There was nothing peaceful about the way he had gripped my wrist. Nothing peaceful about the terror in his eyes. The obituary was sparse, the kind written for a man who had outlived his money and his friends. It listed his occupation as a master mechanic and independent contractor for 40 years. It mentioned a love for vintage motorcycles, and it listed one survivor, a daughter, Maris Rusk, of Oakhaven. Oakhaven was a town 2 hours west, a place that had seen better decades. It was far enough away that Connor would never accidentally be there, yet close enough for a desperate man to drive to Cedar Vale to watch a stranger's kitchen. I started the engine. I was not going to work today. I was not going to sign any more papers. I was going to find Maris Rusk. The drive was a blur of highway gray and nervous energy. Oakhaven was a patchwork of boarded-up storefronts and struggling local businesses. I found Maris's address from a public directory, a small, weathered bungalow with peeling yellow paint and a yard full of overgrown weeds. It looked like a house that was holding its breath. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, harder. A neighbor, an elderly woman watering dead geraniums, shouted from the porch next door. "She ain't home. Honey, she's at work. The diner on Main. Double shift." I thanked her and drove to Main Street. The diner was called Simply Betty's, the neon sign buzzing with a dying flicker. Inside, the air smelled of grease and old coffee. It was the lunch rush, noisy and chaotic. I spotted her immediately. She looked so much like him it hurt. She had the same sharp cheekbones, the same intense, watchful eyes. though hers were dark brown instead of blue. She was wiping down a counter, her movements aggressive and efficient. She looked to be in her late 30s, wearing a stained apron and an expression that said she had no patience for the world. I sat at a booth in her section. When she came over with a notepad, she didn't look at me. "Coffee?" she asked. "I am looking for Maris Rusk," I said. She froze. The pen stopped moving. She looked up, her eyes narrowing instantly. "Who's asking?" "My name is Meredith Ashmere," I said. The reaction was visceral. She dropped the notepad. It hit the table with a slap. Her face went from tired to mask-like in a split second. She took a step back, her hands curling into fists at her sides. "You have some nerve," she hissed, her voice low and trembling with rage. "You have some absolute nerve coming here. Did he send you? Is he worried my dad left something else behind?" "No," I said quickly, raising my hands. "Connor didn't send me. He doesn't know I am here. I was with your father when he died." Maris stared at me, her chest heaving. "You were with him." "He grabbed my hand," I whispered. "He gave me a key, and he told me my husband is a monster." The anger in her eyes didn't vanish, but it shifted, replaced by a wary confusion. She looked around the diner to ensure no one was listening. "Wait for my break," she said sharply. 10 minutes, out back." I waited by the dumpsters in the alleyway. It was cold, and the smell of garbage was overwhelming, but I didn't move. 10 minutes later, Maris pushed the heavy metal door open. She lit a cigarette immediately, her hands shaking slightly. "Talk," she said, "and make it fast." "I don't know what happened between your father and my husband," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But Gideon left me evidence, photos, a USB drive. He said Connor is having an affair, but I think it is more than that. I think Connor is using me." Maris let out a bitter, smoke-filled laugh. "Using you, lady. He is eating you alive. You just haven't felt the teeth yet." She took a long drag and leaned against the brick wall. "My dad wasn't crazy. He was a mechanic. He worked hard his whole life. He had a nest egg. Not much. Just enough to retire and fix up his bikes. Then he met Connor Whitfall." I felt a sickening drop in my stomach. Connor was his client. Connor was his advisor. Maris spat the word. "Dad met him at a car show 3 years ago. Connor charmed him, said he could help Dad invest his savings, protect it from taxes. He set up this whole portfolio, Whitfall Advisory." "Whitfall Advisory," I repeated, the name tasting like poison. "It was all smoke," Maris said. "For a year. The statements looked great. Dad thought he was rich. Then, right when Dad got the cancer diagnosis, the money vanished." "Market correction," Connor said. "Liquidity issues. It was gone. All of it. $150,000. Dad couldn't pay for the treatments. He lost the house, the big one, the one I grew up in. We had to move to this rental." I covered my mouth with my hand. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," Maris said coldly. "Connor is clean. That's his thing. He's a ghost. Dad tried to sue, but there was no paper trail leading to Connor. The contracts were signed by shell companies, by representatives, by you." I froze. "What did you say?" Maris threw her cigarette on the ground and crushed it with her sneaker. "You heard me? Dad spent his last 6 months obsessing over it. He followed Connor. He dug through trash. He found out how Connor does it. He doesn't sign the dirty stuff. He gets people he trusts to sign it, or he makes it look like they did." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded, grease-stained piece of paper. "I carry this around to remind me why I hate the world," she said. "Dad stole this from Connor's car about 2 months ago. It is a draft of the investment transfer that wiped my dad out." She handed it to me. It was a standard-looking financial document, dense with legal jargon. At the bottom, there were 2 signature lines. One was signed by Marcus Vane, the name I had seen on the LLC registry. The other was signed by Meredith Ashmere. I stared at the signature. The room, the alley seemed to spin. It was my signature. The loop of the M, the sharp cross of the T. The way the H trailed off at the end. It was identical to the way I signed my driver's license. It was identical to the way I signed birthday cards. But I had never seen this document in my life. "I didn't sign this," I whispered. "I swear to God. Maris, I didn't sign this." "I know," Maris said, her voice dropping to a terrifying quiet. "Dad knew too. That's why he tried to warn you. He watched Connor practice." "Practice?" "In the park," Maris said. "Dad saw him sitting in his car with a notepad, doing it over and over again, copying your signature from old checks. He has been forging your name on liability clauses for years. Mrs. Whitfall, if the feds ever come looking for the missing money, they aren't going to find Connor. They are going to find you." I leaned against the dumpster, feeling like I was going to be sick. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was systemic. Connor hadn't just cheated on me, he had stolen my identity. He had turned me into a criminal without my knowledge. "Why didn't Gideon go to the police?" I asked, my voice cracking. "He tried," Maris said. "They laughed at him, said it was a civil matter, said without the original documents, it was just a dying man's conspiracy theory. And Connor knew Dad was watching. He taunted him. He knew Dad was running out of time." Maris stepped closer, her eyes locking onto mine. The hostility was gone, replaced by a shared, grim understanding. "My dad was strong," she said. "The cancer was bad. Yeah, but the doctors said he had another 6 months, maybe a year." She paused, her throat working as she swallowed back tears. "Last week, he told me he was going to confront Connor. He said he had found the smoking gun that USB drive you have. He said he was going to make Connor pay." "And then?" I asked. "And then, 2 days later, he collapsed," Maris said. "Total organ failure. The doctor said it was the cancer spreading fast. But Dad in the ambulance. He grabbed my arm. He said, he gave me water. Connor gave me water." The air in the alley turned freezing cold. "Water," I whispered. "Dad met Connor one last time in the park. Connor was apologizing, gave him a bottle of water, peace offering." Maris's face was hard as stone. "My dad didn't die from cancer. Mirith, not that fast, not that violently. He died because he was a loose end." I looked down at the forged signature in my hand. The ink looked so permanent, so damning. "He killed him," I stated. It wasn't a question. "I can't prove it," Maris said. "No autopsy. He was a hospice patient. No one investigates when a terminal man dies. It was the perfect crime. Just like using his wife as a human shield is the perfect scam." She reached out and took the paper back, folding it carefully. "You need to wake up," Maris said. "My dad died trying to save you because he felt guilty that his money helped build Connor's empire. Don't let him die for nothing. Connor thinks you are stupid. He thinks you are just the nice wife who signs the tax forms and bakes the bread. Show him he is wrong." "I will," I said. The fear I had felt for days was crystallizing into something else, something sharp and cold, like the key in my pocket. "I am going to take him down, every single piece of him." Maris nodded. "Be careful. He killed a man who had nothing left to lose. Imagine what he will do to someone who can actually hurt him." I walked back to my car, my legs feeling heavy but steady. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at my hands on the steering wheel. They were the hands of a woman who had been framed, the hands of a woman who had been sleeping next to a murderer. I started the car. I wasn't going back to Cedar Vale to hide. I was going back to prepare. Connor Whitfall had spent years practicing my signature. Now, I was going to make sure it was the signature on his death warrant. Maris was right. The game had changed. This wasn't a divorce anymore. It was a war for survival. And I had one advantage Connor didn't know about. I knew I was already dead on paper. And dead women have nothing to fear. The change in Connor was not subtle. It was an aggressive, suffocating performance of affection that felt less like love and more like a perimeter check. For the last 3 days, since I had met Maris in that alleyway, Connor had morphed into the perfect husband. He brought home bouquets of expensive lilies that smelled too strong, filling the kitchen with a funereal sweetness. He texted me 6 times a day, asking what I had for lunch, how my mood was, if I was drinking enough water. "You look tired, Mireth," he said one evening, standing behind me as I washed dishes. He placed his hands on my shoulders, his thumbs digging into the muscle a little too hard. "You've been distant. Is everything okay at the office?" I froze, the soapy sponge dripping in my hand. This was the test. He was probing the perimeter, looking for cracks in my facade. If I showed him anger, if I showed him the suspicion rotting inside me, he would know I had met someone. He would know the Myreth he had constructed was malfunctioning. I forced my shoulders to drop. I leaned back into him, fighting the urge to vomit. "It's just work," I sighed, making my voice sound thin and brittle. "Harrow and Pines is a nightmare right now. Audits, compliance checks. I feel like I'm drowning in paper." It was a calculated lie. By blaming work, I gave him a reason for my stress that had nothing to do with him. I became the damsel in distress, not the detective in the shadows. "Poor thing," he cooed, kissing the top of my head. "You work too hard. You need to let me take care of you. We need to simplify things." Simplify. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. He steered me toward the living room, sat me down on the plush sofa, and poured me a glass of wine. Then, he walked to his briefcase. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew what was coming. He returned with a folder. It was transparent plastic, and at the top, holding the pages together, was a bright red clip. The same red clip I had seen in Sloane Merritt's hand in the parking lot at Larkstone Court. "Since you are so stressed," Connor said, his voice smooth as oil, "I thought I would take some things off your plate. I had my team look at our asset structures. We can save about $8,000 a year in taxes if we shift some of the joint holdings into a liability-protected trust." He placed the folder on the coffee table and uncapped a pen. He set the pen down next to the paper, perfectly parallel to the edge. "I just need a few signatures," he said, smiling. "Standard stuff. I put sticky notes where you need to sign so you don't have to wade through the legalese." I looked at the folder. It wasn't just paper. It was a trap. If I signed this, I was acknowledging the assets. I was validating whatever shell game he was playing with Whitfall Advisory. I reached out and picked up the wine glass instead of the pen. My hand trembled. Just a little. I hoped he interpreted it as fatigue. "Connor, I can't look at another contract today," I said, rubbing my temples. "My eyes are blurring. I signed off on 300 pages of municipal bylaws this afternoon." Connor's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. The warmth evaporated from the room instantly. "It will take 2 minutes. Mireth," he said, "it is just a signature. You trust me, don't you?" There it was, the pivot, the weaponization of intimacy. "Of course I trust you." I lied, taking a sip of wine to hide my grimace. "But I have a rule. I never sign anything when I have a migraine. I make mistakes. Let me look at it over the weekend at the cabin." He stared at me for 5 long seconds. The silence stretched taut between us. He was assessing me, calculating the risk. If he pushed too hard, he looked desperate. If he backed off, he lost his window. "You're acting strange," he said softly. "You've been jumpy all week, paranoiac, almost—" "I'm exhausted. Connor," I snapped, letting a flash of real irritation bleed through. "Maybe it is not just exhaustion," he said, leaning forward. "I have noticed you talking to yourself, pacing. Maybe you should see doctor. Aris again. I have some Valium left over from my dental surgery. Maybe you should take one, just to smooth out the edges." The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. Valium, sedation. I remembered Gideon Rusk. He gave me water. Connor didn't want a wife anymore. He wanted a patient, a sedated, compliant, foggy-brained woman who would sign her name to anything just to make the room stop spinning. If I started taking pills, if I went on record as being unstable or anxious, anything I said later would be dismissed as the ramblings of a hysterical woman. "I don't need pills," I said, standing up. "I need sleep. I am going to bed. Leave the folder. I will look at it when I can see straight." I walked out of the room before he could answer. I felt his eyes boring into my back, two burning points of malice. I didn't lock the bedroom door, that would be too suspicious, but I pushed a heavy armchair in front of it, just enough to make noise if it opened. The next morning, the battlefield shifted to the one place I thought was safe, my office. I arrived at Harrow and Pines at 8:30. My desk felt like a sanctuary until Tessa walked in. She didn't have coffee this time. She had a tablet, and her face was pale. "Conference room," she whispered. "Now." We huddled in the small, glass-walled room at the end of the hall. Tessa disabled the microphone on the conference phone, a habit of ours that suddenly felt very serious. "Internal audit flagged a file this morning," Tessa said, keeping her voice low. "It is the structural integrity bid for the Kensington Overpass project from 3 years ago." "I remember that project," I said. "We lost the bid." "We did," Tessa said, "but the audit shows that a secondary compliance waiver was filed, a waiver that certified the subcontractor had insurance when they didn't. That subcontractor went bust last week, and now the city is suing for negligence." "What does that have to do with me?" I asked, though a cold knot was already forming in my stomach. Tessa turned the tablet toward me. "The waiver was signed by you, Mareth." I looked at the screen. There it was, my signature, Mareth Ashmere, bold, confident, with the distinctive loop on the M. "I didn't sign this," I said, my voice shaking. "Tessa, look at the date. November 14th. 3 years ago, I was in the hospital. I was having my appendix out. I wasn't even in the building." Tessa zoomed in on the signature. "It is a digital stamp," she said, "but it was authorized from your user account. Someone logged in as you, bypassed the two-factor authentication, which was weaker back then, and applied the stamp." "It was Connor," I whispered. Tessa looked at me, her eyes wide. "Your husband. How would he have your login?" "He's in IT logistics," I said, the realization spilling out of me. "He set up our home network. He set up my remote access when I started working from home during the pandemic. He has my keystrokes. He has everything." "Myreth," Tessa said, gripping my arm, "if this goes to legal, you are looking at gross negligence, maybe fraud charges. You need to get ahead of this." "I can't go to legal yet," I said. "If I tip them off, they lock me out of the system. I need proof that it wasn't me." "Then you need to move fast," Tessa said. "They are going to seize your hard drive by the end of the week." I spent the next 4 hours in a fever state of digital espionage. I didn't do any actual work. I plugged in the external hard drive I had bought with cash that morning. I started downloading everything: my email archives, the server access logs, the metadata from the dates where the suspicious signatures appeared. I was backing up my life because I knew someone was trying to delete it. At 4:15, my phone buzzed. It was Connor. "Dinner reservations at 7. Let's celebrate the weekend trip." Celebrate. The audacity was breathtaking. I went home. I played the part. I wore the dress he liked. We went to an Italian place downtown. The wine was expensive, the lights were low, and the conversation was a minefield. "I was thinking," Connor said, swirling his red wine, "about what you said regarding the contract, about making mistakes." "Yeah," I said, keeping my hands in my lap so he wouldn't see them clenched into fists. "Precision is everything, isn't it?" he mused, looking at the candle flame. "In my line of work, and yours, one wrong variable, one person signing on the wrong line, and the whole system collapses. It is fragile." He looked up at me. His eyes were empty of warmth. They were flat, dead surfaces. "You have to be careful, Mareth," he said. "One mistake can ruin a life. I would hate to see you make a mistake." It wasn't advice. It was a threat. He knew. Somehow. He knew I was resisting. He was telling me that if I didn't fall in line, if I didn't sign the papers with the red clip, he would pull the trigger on the Kensington Overpass file. He would let me take the fall for his fraud. "I'll be careful," I whispered. "I promise." We drove home in silence. When we got back, Connor went straight to the shower. He was confident. He thought he had rattled me enough to ensure compliance. While the water ran, I moved. I didn't go to the guest room this time. I went to his study. The heavy oak door was always closed. I knew the code to the wall safe behind the painting. It was his birthday. Narcissists never choose random numbers. I punched in the code 0512. The safe beeped and clicked open. Inside were stacks of cash, passports, and a leather binder. I ignored the cash. I pulled out the binder. It was his insurance portfolio. I flipped past the car insurance, the house insurance. I found the life insurance policies. There was an old policy, from when we first got married, $500,000. Beneficiary Myrith Ashmere. But behind it, there was a new document, a term life policy issued by a company I didn't recognize. Insured. Myrith Ashmere. Coverage amount, $2 million. Effective date, October 4th, last year. October 4th. I did the math in my head. October 4th was the week after Connor had started his Tuesday trips to Rookmere. It was the week he had first met Sloane Merritt. I looked at the beneficiary line. It didn't say Connor Whitfall. It read, The Whitfall Family Trust. And below that, in the fine print of the trust details attached to the back trustee Sloane Merritt, I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold and dizzy. He hadn't just framed me, he had monetized my death. If I went to prison for fraud, I was useless to him. But if I died perhaps an accident at a cabin, a suicide from the shame of the corporate investigation, he would walk away with $2 million, clean and laundered through a trust controlled by his mistress. The shower water turned off. I shoved the papers back into the binder, shoved the binder into the safe, and closed it. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hit the lock button. I ran back to the bedroom and dove under the covers, feigning sleep. My heart was thumping against the mattress like a trapped bird. The door opened. Connor walked in. I could smell the steam and the soap. He stood by the bed for a long time. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Sleep tight, darling, he whispered into the dark. It sounded like a countdown. I lay there, the knowledge sitting on my chest like a stone. I wasn't just fighting for my reputation anymore. I was fighting for my life. The cabin trip was in 2 days. He wanted to take me to the woods. He wanted to disconnect. I knew exactly what he planned to disconnect. But he didn't know about the key. He didn't know about Maris, and he didn't know that I had seen the policy. I closed my eyes, visualizing the face of the dying man in the hospice. Don't go home alone, he had said. I was home, but I wasn't alone. I had his ghost. And come the weekend, Connor Whitfall was going to realize that he had underestimated the woman he planned to kill. I wasn't going to be the victim in his story. I was going to be the twist ending. Revenge, I discovered, is not a scream. It is not a slashed tire or a glass of wine thrown in a face. True revenge, the kind that dismantles a person bone by bone, is a bureaucratic process. It is a filing error. It is a compliance audit. It is the slow, grinding machinery of consequence. Connor Whitfall had built his life on paper fake signatures, shell companies, liability waivers. It was only fitting that I used paper to bury him. I needed a professional. I found her name on a secure forum for forensic accounting, a place where people went when the numbers didn't add up and the police wouldn't listen. Dahlia Rourke. She wasn't a noir detective in a trench coat. She was a 20-something woman with brilliant green hair and a setup in a co-working space that looked more like a hacker's den than an office. You have a problem with ghosts, Dahlia said 5 minutes into our first meeting, scrolling through the data I had brought her on a clean flash drive. Your husband loves them. Ghost accounts, ghost directors, ghost money. Can you track it? I asked. Money always leaves a footprint, she said, her fingers flying across a mechanical keyboard. He is using a layering strategy. He moves cash into Whitfall Advisory, then filters it out to 2 secondary accounts under a different LLC. One is domestic, here in the state. The other is offshore, but sloppy. He is arrogant. He thinks no one is looking. Who is Marcus Vane? I asked. The name on the business registry. Dahlia tapped a key and spun her monitor around. Marcus Vane doesn't exist. It is a synthetic identity. The social security number belongs to a man who died in 1995. Connor bought the identity on the dark web. He is signing as Vane to keep his hands clean, and he is signing as you to take the fall." She pulled up a banking record. "I found 2 corporate accounts linked to the Vane identity. There is nearly $400,000 sitting in them. That is the money he stole from Gideon Rusk and God knows who else." "Keep digging," I said. Writing her a retainer check from my personal savings money Connor didn't monitor. "I want to know where every cent came from." Armed with Dahlia's data, I met Maris again. We turned the back room of Betty's diner into a war room. We built a timeline on the back of paper placemats. Gideon wasn't the only one. Maris had gone through her father's old notes and found names people Gideon had met at the same investment seminars where Connor prowled. We found a widow in Oakhaven who lost her settlement money, a small business owner in Cedar Vale who thought he was buying into a logistics bond. "He targets the vulnerable," Maris said, her voice shaking with quiet rage. "People who are too embarrassed to admit they were scammed. People who don't have the money for lawyers." "He creates a map of silence," I said, connecting a red line between the widow's name and Whitfall Advisory. But he forgot that silence is fragile. I had the map. Now I needed to set the trap. I went home that evening with a plan that required an Oscar-worthy performance. Connor was in the living room, reading a magazine, the red-clipped folder still sitting on the coffee table like an unexploded bomb. I walked in, kicked off my heels, and sighed the sigh of a woman who has surrendered to exhaustion. "Hey," I said softly. I walked over and sat next to him, resting my head on his shoulder. I felt him tense, then relax. "Hey yourself," he said, putting the magazine down. "Better day." "A little," I lied. "I have been thinking about what you said, about the trust, the tax restructuring." Connor turned to me, his eyes lighting up with that predatory hope. And I think you are right," I said. "We should protect our assets. I don't want to worry about money." I reached for the folder. I saw his hand twitch, ready to hand me a pen. "But," I added, pulling the folder onto my lap but not opening it, "I can't sign it tonight. My brain is fried from the audit at work. And you know how my dad drilled it into me, never sign a legal document without a second pair of eyes." Connor's smile faltered. "Moreth, it is just a standard trust. I wrote it myself." "I know," I said, stroking his arm. "And I trust you. But for my own peace of mind, I want to send a scan to our family accountant, just to double-check the tax codes. You know how the IRS changes things every year. I don't want us to get audited because of a technicality." It was a reasonable request, a boring, bureaucratic request. If he refused, he looked suspicious. If he agreed, he risked exposure. He hesitated. I could see the gears turning. He was calculating whether his fake paperwork could stand up to a cursory glance from a small-town accountant. "Sure," he said finally, though his voice was tight. "That is fine. But we need to move fast. The fiscal quarter ends next week." "I will scan it tomorrow," I promised, "and I will sign it before the weekend trip." I had bought myself time, and I had forced him to give me the document digitally. The next day, at Harrow and Pines, Tessa provided the final nail for the coffin. We were in the server room this time, under the guise of a hardware check. The hum of the cooling fans provided a cover for our conversation. "I pulled the access logs for the dates on the forged documents," Tessa said, handing me a printout. "Look at the IP addresses." I scanned the list. On November 14th, 3 years ago, the date of the Kensington signature, my account was accessed from an IP address ending in 44. "That is not the office," I said, "and it is not our home Wi-Fi." "No," Tessa said. "I tracer-routed it. It is a static IP assigned to a commercial building downtown." She pointed to the address, 400 West 4th Street. My stomach dropped. "That is the gym," I whispered. "Connor's gym. He goes there every Tuesday and Thursday." "He logged in as you using the gym's Wi-Fi," Tessa said. "He probably sat in the lobby or the locker room, approved the fraudulent waiver on his phone, and then went to lift weights. He created a digital alibi. He could prove he wasn't at a computer, while you were signing the document." "It is perfect," I said, a cold admiration mixing with the horror. "He is in the gym, surrounded by witnesses. while my digital ghost commits a crime. It is not perfect anymore, Tessa said fiercely, because now we have the logs. We can prove you were in the hospital. We can prove the login came from his location. This exonerates you, Mireth. It exonerates me, I agreed, and it indicts him. I took the printout. I folded it until it was small enough to fit in my bra. For the next 2 days, I lived in a state of dissociative calm. I cooked Connor's favorite meals. I laughed at his jokes. I let him hold my hand while we watched TV. It was terrifying how easy it was. I looked at him and saw a monster. But I treated him like a husband. I wondered if this was how he had treated me for years, looking at a scapegoat, but treating her like a wife. In my head, I wasn't present. I was running a checklist. Bank records secured. Witness testimony from Maris recorded. Digital logs. Printed and backed up. The USB drive. Decrypted by Dahlia. The USB drive had been the final blow. It contained audio recordings Gideon had made of his meetings with Connor, hours of them, in one. Connor's voice was crystal clear. Don't worry about the legality. Gideon, my wife handles the compliance side. She signs off on everything. If it goes south, she is the one holding the bag, not us. He had sold me out years ago, before I even knew the game had started. On Friday morning, the day before we were supposed to leave for the cabin, I made one final stop. I went to the office of Rowan Klein, a civil litigation attorney I had found, one who had no connection to Connor, no connection to his firm, and a reputation for being a shark. I didn't hire him. I handed him a sealed package. This is a dead man's switch, I told him. He was an older man with kind eyes that sharpened when I spoke. Explain, he said. Inside this package is evidence of felony fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder, I said, my voice steady. I am going to a cabin in the woods with my husband this weekend. If I do not call you by noon on Monday and give you a specific code word, you are to open this package and deliver the contents to the district attorney and the FBI. Rowan looked at the package, then at me. Mrs. Whitfall, if you are in danger, you should not go to that cabin. I have to go, I said. If I don't go, he runs. He has offshore accounts. He has a fake identity. If I spook him now, he disappears. And I am left with the debt and the legal mess. I need him to think he has won. I need him to think I am walking into the trap. This is incredibly dangerous, Rowan warned. I know, I said, but I am not going alone. I have eyes on me. I left his office feeling lighter. The safety net was strung. If Connor hurt me, if I had an accident on the stairs or drowned in the lake, his life was over. I drove home, the tension winding tight in my chest. I parked in the driveway and checked my phone one last time before entering the house. There was a new email in my personal inbox. It was from an unrecognizable address, a string of random numbers and letters. I opened it. There was no subject line. The body of the email contained only 4 words. Do not trust Sloan. I stared at the screen. Who sent this, Maris Dahlia or someone else? Do not trust Sloan. It seemed redundant. I already knew Sloan was his accomplice. She was the trustee of the insurance policy that put a bounty on my head. Why would I trust her? Then my phone rang. The screen lit up with a number I didn't have saved, but I recognized the area code. It was a Rookmere number. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the decline button. Then, instinct took over. I swiped right. Hello. Mireth. The voice was cool, clipped, and instantly recognizable. It was the voice of the woman in the parking lot, the woman in the navy suit. Sloan, I said, the name tasting like ash. Don't hang up, she said. Her voice wasn't arrogant. It was urgent. I know you know about the insurance policy. I know you know about the trust. My blood ran cold. How could she know I hadn't told anyone but the lawyer? And that was 20 minutes ago. I don't know what you are talking about, I said, gripping the phone. Cut the act, Sloan said sharply. Connor is moving the timeline up. He called the notary for the cabin. He isn't waiting for the weekend to settle. He is going to force the signature tonight. Why are you telling me this? I asked. You are helping him. I was helping him, Sloan corrected, until I found out that my name is also on a liability waiver for the shell company. He isn't just setting you up. Meredith, he is setting us both up. If you go down, I go down with you. There was a pause. I could hear traffic in the background on her end. We need to meet, Sloan said. Right now, before he gets home, there is a file you don't have. A file that proves he isn't just a fraudster. What kind of file? A medical file, Sloan said. Gideon Rusk didn't just die of cancer. Connor had access to his medication schedule. I have the proof. I looked at the house. It stood there, silent and waiting. My sanctuary, my prison. Where? I asked. The library parking lot on 4th, she said. 10 minutes. Come alone. If you bring the police, I burn the evidence. The line went dead. I sat in the car, my heart racing. The anonymous email warned me not to trust her, but she was offering me the weapon I needed to upgrade this from fraud to murder. Was it a trap, or was it the crack in Connor's armor I had been praying for? I put the car in reverse. I had to know. The checklist in my head had one empty box left, and Sloan Merritt just offered me the pen to check it. The text message came through as I pulled into the library parking lot, vibrating against my thigh like a warning shot. Change of plan. Too exposed. The Obsidian Bar at the Grand Hotel. Room 204. Go now. I stared at the screen. The Obsidian was a dark, cavernous place downtown, known for its overpriced cocktails and deep leather booths where faces disappeared into the shadows. It was the kind of place where people went to have conversations that did not belong on a subpoena. I turned the car around. My hands were slick on the steering wheel. The anonymous email I had received, "Do not trust Sloan," was burning in my mind. But curiosity is a powerful override. I needed to see the woman who had helped my husband dismantle my life. I walked into the hotel lobby at 4:45. The air was chilled and smelled of expensive perfume and old money. I found Sloan sitting in the farthest corner of the bar. She did not look like the formidable architect of doom I had seen in the parking lot at Larkstone Court. She looked frayed. The severe bun was looser, strands of steel-gray hair escaping to frame a face that was pale and tight with tension. She didn't have a drink. She had a thick folder on the table, her hand resting on top of it as if it were a loaded weapon. "You came," she said. Her voice was lower than I expected, lacking the seductiveness I had projected onto her. It was the voice of a woman who was tired of running. "I am here," I said, sliding into the booth opposite her. I kept my coat on. I wanted her to know I was ready to leave at any second. "You have 5 minutes before I call my lawyer and give him your name as a co-conspirator." Sloan let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You think I am sleeping with him, don't you?" "I saw you," I said cold. "I saw the meetings. I saw the way he looks at you." "He looks at me like I am a tool," Sloan snapped. "Like I am a wrench he uses to tighten a bolt. I am not his mistress. Meredith, I am his cleaner." She pushed the folder across the polished mahogany table. "I am a freelance forensic actuary and legal strategist," she said, reciting the title with a bitter twist of her lips. "Connor hired me 8 months ago. He told me he was planning a high-risk expansion for his logistics firm and needed to insulate his personal assets from potential litigation. It is a standard request in corporate law. I build firewalls. I create layers between the man and the money." "And I am the layer," I said. It wasn't a question. "You are the absorption pad," Sloan corrected. "Open it." I flipped the cover. It wasn't the red-clipped folder Connor had tried to get me to sign. This was a draft for something called the Aurora Distressed Asset Fund. I scanned the legalese. It was dense, deliberately confusing, filled with clauses about leveraged buyouts and toxic debt absorption, but my eyes, sharpened by days of paranoia, found the trap immediately. Article 4, Section 2. Liability assignment. In the event of insolvency or regulatory penalty, all financial and criminal liability shall be assumed by the principal signatory, herein referred to as the managing associate, M.A. "M.A.," I whispered. "Meredith Ashmere." "He insisted on the initials," Sloan said. He said it was to keep the document clean until the final execution. He told me M.A. was a silent partner who understood the risks, a savvy investor looking for a tax write-off. He lied, I said. I know that now, Sloane said, leaning forward. I didn't care at first. I get paid to build the structure, not to interview the partners. But then things got messy. Gideon Rusk, I said. Sloane flinched. The name hit her like a physical slap. He told me Gideon was a disgruntled former employee. He said Gideon was stalking him, but then Gideon died, and the morning he died 2 hours before the official time of death, Connor called me. She looked around the empty bar, her eyes darting to the bartender polishing glasses. She lowered her voice to a whisper. He told me to wipe the correspondence regarding the Rusk portfolio. He didn't say if Gideon dies. He spoke about him in the past tense. Gideon was a problem. Sloane, delete the files. I felt the blood drain from my face. He knew. He knew because he made it happen, Sloane said. And that is when I realized that M.A. wasn't a silent partner. She was a victim. And if he was willing to kill Gideon to silence a debt, what would he do to the person who built the trap? She reached into her purse and pulled out a cigarette case, turning it over in her nervous fingers. I am not doing this for you, Mireth, she said, her voice trembling. I am doing this because I don't look good in orange jumpsuit, and I definitely don't look good in a coffin. He is done with me. I finished the structure. I am a loose end now. I looked at the woman across from me. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to throw my drink in her face and scream at her for helping him ruin me. But hate is a luxury I couldn't afford. I needed her. If you testify, I said, keeping my voice steady, if you bring this document to the district attorney and explain the structure, you can cut a deal. You become a witness, not a defendant. Sloane stared at me. He will destroy me. He has files on everyone, including me. He is going to destroy you anyway, I said brutally. At least this way. You get to strike first. Sloane looked down at the table. She seemed to be warring with herself. I need protection, real protection, not just a lawyer. I have a plan, I said. This weekend, the cabin, it ends there. The cabin, Sloane repeated, her eyes widening. You are still going. I have to. You are insane, she hissed. Do you know why he wants you at the cabin? It isn't for a vacation. It is a jurisdictional dead zone. It is 20 miles from the nearest sheriff. If you have an accident there, it takes an hour for an ambulance to arrive. I know, I said. That is why I need you to be ready. When I give the signal, I need you to walk into the police station with this folder. Can you do that? Sloane hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. Yes, I can do that. I stood up. I took the folder. Don't go home. Sloane, stay in a hotel. Use cash. Mireth, she called out as I turned to leave. I stopped. He loves you, she said, in his own twisted way. That is what makes him dangerous. He thinks he is doing this for the family. He thinks sacrificing you is a noble act to save the empire he built. He doesn't see himself as a villain. He sees himself as a man making hard choices. That makes it worse, I said. I walked out of the hotel, clutching the folder to my chest. My phone buzzed again. It was Dahlia Rourke. Don't talk, Dahlia said, her voice rapid fire. Just listen. I got a flag on the offshore account. He initiated a transfer request 30 minutes ago. How much, I asked, unlocking my car. $250,000, Dahlia said. And he liquidated the domestic holdings. Mireth, he is cashing out. He is moving everything to the Caymans. The transfer clears on Monday morning. Monday, I repeated. He needs you to sign the final liability release this weekend, Dahlia said. Once you sign that, the debt transfers to you and the cash transfers to him. If you don't sign, the bank freezes the assets on Monday because of the irregularity alerts I triggered. He is desperate. He is on a deadline. Okay, I said. Keep tracking him. Mireth, Dahlia warned. Desperate men do violent things. I hung up. The sun was setting. casting long, bloody shadows across the pavement. I drove home. The house was quiet when I arrived. The lights were on in the living room. I walked in, my heart thudding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Connor was there. He had pulled 2 suitcases out of the closet. He was folding clothes, his movements precise and calm. He looked up and smiled that warm, devastating smile that had fooled me for a decade. "Hey," he said. "I started packing for us. I figured we should get an early start tomorrow." "That is sweet of you," I said. I forced myself to walk over to him. I forced myself to kiss his cheek. He smelled of cedar and starch. "Where have you been?" he asked casually, folding a sweater. "Just running errands," I said. "Getting things ready for the trip?" "Good," he said. "It is going to be perfect. Just us. No phones, no work." He turned to grab a pair of socks from the pile. As he turned, his suit jacket, draped over the back of the armchair, shifted. I don't know why I did it. Instinct, suspicion, the sheer need to know. While his back was turned, I reached out and slipped my hand into the inner pocket of his jacket. My fingers brushed against something cold and hard. I pulled it out, shielding it with my body. It was a USB drive. But it wasn't just any drive. It was an ancient, scuffed black stick with a piece of white tape on the side. On the tape, written in shaky, jagged ballpoint pen, were the initials G.R. Gideon Rusk. My breath caught in my throat. This was identical to the one in the sewing tin upstairs, the one Gideon had left in locker E17. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Gideon hadn't just made 1 copy. He had made 2, or Connor had taken this one from him. "What's wrong?" Connor asked, turning back around. I shoved the drive back into his pocket in a blur of motion, my heart rate spiking to 150. I turned to face him, forcing a smile that felt like it was tearing my face apart. "Nothing," I said. "Just realized I forgot to buy sunscreen." Connor laughed. "It is October, Mareth. I don't think we need sunscreen." He walked over and hugged me. I stood stiff in his arms, feeling the hard lump of the USB drive pressing against my chest through the fabric of his jacket. He had Gideon's drive. That meant he had heard the recordings. He knew exactly what Gideon knew, and if he had kept it, instead of destroying it, it meant he was keeping it as a trophy, or insurance. But worse if he knew Gideon had a drive. Did he know there was a second one? Did he know I had it? "You are trembling," Connor whispered into my ear. "I am just cold," I lied. "Don't worry," he said, pulling back and looking into my eyes. His pupils were dark, dilated. "I will keep you warm at the cabin, I promise." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the lines around his eyes, the handsome jawline, the man I had promised to love until death do us part, and I realized that Sloan was wrong. He didn't love me. You don't frame the person you love. You don't prepare to bury them under a mountain of debt and lies. He didn't love me. He owned me, and he was getting ready to liquidate his asset. "I will go finish packing," I said, pulling away. I walked up the stairs, my legs feeling like lead. I had the evidence. I had the witness. But as I touched the banister, the anonymous email flashed in my mind again. "Do not trust Sloan." Why did I feel like I was walking into a play where everyone knew the lines but me? I went into the bedroom and closed the door. I took out my phone and sent a single text message to Maris. "It is happening. Initiate protocol read." I deleted the message. Then I went to the closet and started packing my own bag. I didn't pack sunscreen. I packed the sewing tin with the duplicate drive. I packed the red folder, and at the bottom of the bag, wrapped in a thick wool sweater, I packed a canister of pepper spray and a heavy, brass flashlight. If Connor Whitfall wanted a weekend in the woods, he was going to get one, but only one of us was walking out of those trees. The Friday before the cabin trip did not begin with the sun. It began with Connor standing at the foot of the bed, fully dressed in his charcoal suit, watching me sleep. I woke with a start, my heart hammering against my ribs before I even registered why. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said, his voice smooth and low. I just wanted to see you before I left. You looked peaceful. It was a lie. I hadn't been peaceful. I had been grinding my teeth so hard my jaw ached. But I forced a sleepy smile. What time is it? 6:30, he said. I have a breakfast meeting, but I was thinking, I might swing by your office around lunch. Take you out. Maybe we can grab Thai food from that place you like. This was not a date. This was a perimeter check. He wanted to see who I was talking to. He wanted to mark his territory in the lobby of Harrow and Pines, to smile at the receptionist and play the role of the devoted husband so that if I disappeared on Saturday, everyone would remember how much he loved me on Friday. I can't, I said, pulling the duvet up to my chin. The audit. We are in lockdown mode. No visitors allowed past the lobby. His eyes narrowed a microscopic tightening of the skin around them, but the smile remained fixed. Right. The audit? Well, text me when you get there. I worry about you. Mireth? He leaned down and kissed my forehead. His lips were dry. Drive safe. As soon as his Audi pulled out of the driveway, I moved with the frantic precision of a soldier behind enemy lines. I did not take my usual car. I took the old sedan, but I parked it 2 blocks away at a supermarket. I called a rideshare to take me to work. I pulled a burner phone from the bottom of my gym bag, a cheap prepaid flip phone I had bought with cash at a gas station in Oak Haven. I texted the number to Dahlia and Maris. Going dark on the primary line. Track me via the app. I had installed a dormant tracking app on my primary phone, which I left in the glove box of my car. Let Connor track that. The real me was carrying the burner. When I arrived at Harrow and Pines, the atmosphere was toxic. The air conditioning was humming too loudly, and people were speaking in hushed tones near the water cooler. At 10 o'clock, the summons came. Mireth, my supervisor said, standing at the door of my cubicle. He didn't look me in the eye. HR wants to see you. Conference room B. I grabbed my laptop and the folder containing the IP logs Tessa had printed. I walked down the long gray corridor. I felt like I was walking to the gallows. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the hangman. I was the one holding the lever. Inside the room sat the director of human resources and a man I didn't recognize, likely external legal counsel. Sit down. Mrs. Ashmere, the director said. We have been reviewing the Kensington file, the lawyer began, skipping the pleasantries. There is a significant irregularity regarding the liability waiver signed on November 14th. The digital signature is yours. The timestamp is yours. Do you deny authorizing this document? I placed my hands flat on the table to stop them from shaking. I deny it absolutely. The system logs say otherwise, the lawyer said, sliding a printout across the table. Your credentials were used. Credentials can be stolen, I said, my voice steady, and systems can be manipulated. I reached into my folder and pulled out the document Tessa and I had prepared. This is my hospital discharge summary from November 14th, I said, sliding it toward them. I was under general anesthesia for an appendectomy at the exact moment that document was signed. Unless I logged into the corporate server from the recovery room while unconscious, I did not sign that waiver. The lawyer frowned, picking up the paper. And this, I continued, sliding the second sheet, is the IP tracer route for the login event. It did not originate from my home. It originated from a commercial Wi-Fi network at 400 West 4th Street. I didn't say it was Connor's gym. I let the address hang there. I am the victim of identity theft, I said, looking the director in the eye. Someone compromised my credentials to push a fraudulent waiver through. I suggest you look for who benefited from that waiver, rather than who was framed by it. The room went silent. The lawyer exchanged a look with the director. We will need to verify this, the lawyer said, his tone shifting from accusatory to cautious. Please do, I said. I stood up. Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do. I walked out of the room, my heart pounding in my throat. I had bought myself time, but I had also rung the bell. I made it back to my desk. My hand was still on the mouse when my primary phone, which I had retrieved from my car and brought up to maintain the illusion, buzzed. It was Connor. Everything okay? I had a bad feeling. The text came through exactly 2 minutes after I left the meeting. I stared at the screen. There was no way he could know, unless... I looked at the small webcam on top of my monitor. I looked at the system tray on my desktop. He wasn't just guessing. He had a keylogger, or a remote view. He knew the meeting had happened. He knew I had pushed back. Panic flared, hot and bright. He knew I was fighting. If he knew I was fighting, the cabin wasn't a trap anymore. It was an execution site. I needed to de-escalate, immediately. I typed a reply, my fingers trembling. Just a stressful review. They are blaming everyone for the budget cuts. I am fine, just tired. Then, I executed the next phase of the plan. I opened the PDF of the trust document, the one with the red clip he had emailed me. I didn't sign it. I opened it in a photo editor and pasted a high-resolution image of my signature, an old one, from a birthday card I had scanned onto the line. It looked perfect to the naked eye, but digitally, it was a mess. The metadata would show it was a paste job. It wouldn't hold up in court for 5 seconds. But to Connor, it would look like surrender. I attached the file to an email. Subject signed trust document. Body Connor. I don't want to fight about money. I scanned it during my lunch break. I will bring the hard copy to the cabin. But here's the digital version so you can stop worrying. I just want a peaceful weekend. I hit send. 10 seconds later, he replied, "Thank you, baby. You made the right choice. See you at home." He bought it, or he pretended to. Either way, the temperature dial lowered just enough for me to breathe. At 3 o'clock, I met Maris in the loading bay behind the building. She was wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. She handed me a manila envelope through the window of her car. "I found another one," she said, her voice rough. "A guy in Oakhaven. Name is Elias. He used to own a landscaping business." "Used to?" I asked. "Connor wiped him out 2 years back." Maris said, "Last winter, Elias hit rock bottom in his garage and almost gave up on everything. His wife stepped in before it was too late." Maris took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red. "I talked to him. He said Connor sat in his kitchen, drank his coffee, and told him the bankruptcy was just a market fluctuation. He watched a man lose his life's work and didn't even blink." "He feeds on it," I said, gripping the envelope. "It makes him feel powerful." "End him, Mirith," Maris said. "For my dad, for Elias. Don't just hurt him, bury him." "I will," I promised. As I walked back into the office, my burner phone buzzed. It was Sloan. "Check your secure email. You need to see the exit strategy." I locked myself in a bathroom stall and opened the email on the burner phone. It was a PDF titled Contingency Plan C, Reputational Containment. It was a draft press release, dated for next Monday. For immediate release, Harrow and Pines compliance officer implicated in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Sources close to the investigation suggest Myrith Ashmere suffered from a gambling addiction and hid losses for years. Gambling addiction. He had planted casino chips in my car trunk 3 months ago. We had gone to a charity casino night, and he had jokingly tossed a handful in there for luck. They were still there. Physical evidence to back up the lie. He had thought of everything. He wasn't just going to frame me. He was going to rewrite my history. He was going to turn me into a degenerate gambler, so that when the money missing from Whitfall Advisory was pinned on me, the world would nod and say, "Of course, the addict did it." I leaned my head against the cold metal of the stall door. The cruelty was so absolute, it was almost beautiful. It was a masterpiece of destruction. I went home at 5:30. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. Connor was in the kitchen, opening a bottle of wine. He looked radiant, relieved. "There she is," he said, turning to beam at me. "My partner." He walked over and wrapped his arms around me. I let him. I smelled the cedar cologne and the faint scent of fear sweat masked by expensive soap. "I got your email," he said into my hair. "Thank you. It means a lot to me that you trust my vision." "I just want us to be secure," I said, reciting the line I had rehearsed. "We will be," he said. "After this weekend, we will be untouchable." He pulled back and looked at me. his eyes filled with tears, actual tears. "Mireth," he choked out, "I know I have been distant, I know I have been stressed, but it is all for us. I want to build a kingdom for you. I remember when we were 25, eating ramen in that studio apartment. I promised you I would give you the world. I'm just trying to keep that promise." It was a dazzling performance. The nostalgia, the vulnerability, the single tear tracking down his cheek. If I hadn't seen the press release accusing me of being a gambling addict, if I hadn't held the forged signature in my hand, I would have melted. I would have apologized for doubting him. "I know, Connor," I said, reaching up to wipe the tear away. I remember. I remembered the ramen, and I remembered that even back then, he never paid his half of the rent on time. "Let's eat," he said, sniffing bravely. I made steaks. We ate. We talked about the weather forecast for the cabin. We played the happy couple. At 8 o'clock, while Connor was in the shower washing off his performance, my burner phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Dahlia. Red alert. He didn't just book a notary. He booked a mobile notary to meet you at the trailhead tomorrow at 9 a.m. But that is not the big news. What I texted back. I accessed his travel agent's portal. He has a one-way ticket to the Cayman Islands booked for Sunday night. Just one ticket. Mireth. He is not coming back, and you are not going with him. Sunday night. That meant he had 48 hours to get the wet signature on the official trust document, verify the transfer, and then dispose of the liability. Me. The cabin wasn't a getaway. It was a disposal site. I heard the shower turn off. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I walked into the bedroom. Connor was toweling off, looking vigorous and strong. "Ready for bed?" he asked, smiling. "We have a big day tomorrow." "I am ready," I said. I climbed into bed and pulled the covers up. I lay there in the dark, listening to his breathing slow down into sleep. He thought he had won. He thought I was the scared, compliant wife who had emailed him a signature to make the bad feelings go away. He thought he was 24 hours away from freedom and a fortune. He didn't know that under the seat of the sedan parked 2 blocks away was a go-bag. He didn't know that Sloane Merritt was sitting in a motel room with a box of files. He didn't know that Maris was parked outside our neighborhood, watching. And he certainly didn't know that the gambling addict he planned to destroy was currently counting down the seconds until she could burn his kingdom to the ground. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I visualized the locker key, E17. Tomorrow, we would go to the woods, and only one of us was coming back. The gravel of the driveway crunched under the tires of the Audi, a sound that usually signaled the start of a relaxing weekend. Today, it sounded like the locking mechanism of a prison cell. The cabin sat nestled in the dense pine woods of the northern ridge, isolated, picturesque, and terrifyingly silent. Connor killed the engine. The silence rushed in to fill the space. "We are here," he said, turning to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Paradise. It is beautiful." I lied. My hand was in my coat pocket, clutching the burner phone. I had sent the signal, "Eagle has landed 5 minutes ago," just before we lost cell service on the main road. I knew Rowan and the team were already in position. The notary Connor had hired was actually an undercover agent from the State Financial Crimes Division, a man named Detective Miller, who had intercepted Connor's request 2 hours ago. We walked inside. The cabin smelled of cedar and cold ash. Connor immediately went to the fireplace to start a fire. Playing the role of the rustic provider, I stood by the heavy oak dining table, the centerpiece of the room. "Make yourself comfortable, babe," Connor called out, striking a match. "I will open some wine. We need to celebrate. The transfer is scheduled to clear first thing Monday morning." "Monday," I repeated, my voice flat. He stood up, brushing ash from his hands, and walked over to his bag. He pulled out the folder. The red clip gleamed in the dim light like a warning beacon. "Actually," he said, his tone shifting from casual to businesslike in a heartbeat, "before we get into the wine, let's just get the paperwork out of the way. The notary will be here in 20 minutes. I want everything prepped." He laid the document on the table. It was the trust agreement. the one that assigned all liability to M.A. Meredith Ashmere. I thought I sent you the digital signature, I said, standing on the other side of the table. You did, Connor said, uncapping a fountain pen. But the bank prefers wet ink, just to be safe. Come on, Meredith, sign it, and we can be done with this. For our future. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at him. Connor, I asked softly, my voice trembling just enough to sell the fear. If I sign this, will everything be okay? Are we really safe? Connor softened his expression, a masterclass in manipulation. He walked around the table and placed a hand on my shoulder. Meredith, listen to me. Once you sign this, the debt is handled. The structure takes care of everything. I will be free to build the life you deserve. No more looking over our shoulders. It is the only way. I will be free, not we. Okay, I whispered. I will sign. I took the pen. I leaned over the paper. I felt his breath on my neck. Eager. Hungry. He was watching his prey walk into the trap. I touched the pen to the paper. Then I stopped. Actually, I said, my voice hardening into steel. I have already signed. Connor frowned. What? I signed the divorce papers, I said, standing up straight and dropping the pen. It clattered loudly onto the wood. And I signed the affidavit for the district attorney. Connor took a step back, his face twisting in confusion. Meredith, what are you talking about? You are stressed. Sit down. No, I said. You sit down. Connor. I reached into my bag and pulled out a different folder. I threw it onto the table. It slid across and hit his hand. Open it, I commanded. He looked at me, then at the folder. He opened it. Inside was the forensic analysis Dahlia had prepared. You spent 3 years practicing my signature, I said, my voice echoing in the cabin. You are good at it, but you are not perfect. You put a heavy pressure on the downstroke of the M. I don't do that. And you loop the H to the left. I loop to the right. Connor stared at the analysis. His face went pale. This is ridiculous, he scoffed, trying to regain control. You are hysterical. I don't know what this is. But we are leaving. He reached for my arm. I wouldn't do that, a deep voice said from the shadows of the hallway. Connor spun around. Rowan Klein stepped out from the bedroom, where he had been waiting since dawn. Behind him was Detective Miller, badge hanging from his neck, and 2 uniformed officers. Connor Whitfall, Miller said. I am an investigator with the State Financial Crimes Division. You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and identity theft. What is this? Connor screamed, backing away until he hit the fireplace. You broke into my cabin, Meredith. Tell them this is a mistake. It is not a mistake, I said. It is an audit. You have nothing, Connor shouted, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. You have some scribbles on paper. I will sue you for everything you have. My accounts are clean. Your accounts are in the Cayman Islands, a woman's voice said. The front door opened. Sloane Merritt walked in. She was wearing a trench coat, her face pale but determined. She held a thick file in her hands. Connor looked at her, and for the first time, I saw true terror in his eyes. Sloane, he breathed. What are you doing? I am closing the file, Connor, Sloane said. She walked over and placed the file on the table next to the red-clipped folder. I gave them the keys, the encryption codes for the shell companies, the transfer logs, the communication history where you ordered me to delete the Gideon Rusk files. You bitch, Connor hissed, lunging toward her. The officers moved fast, intercepting him and shoving him back against the stone hearth. You think you can pin this on me? Connor spat, struggling against the officers. It is her word against mine. She is a disgruntled contractor, and my wife is mentally unstable. She has a gambling addiction. I have the records. We know about the press release. Connor, I said calmly, we know about the casino chips you planted in my trunk. We found them. You still don't have proof of intent, Connor yelled, desperate now. I was trying to protect her. She signed those documents she knew. She didn't know, I said, and I can prove it. I took the small black USB drive out of my pocket, the one Gideon had given me. "Do you recognize this?" I asked. Connor went still. He stopped fighting. He stared at the drive with the jagged white tape. "I found the one in your pocket," I said. "You thought you had the only copy. You thought you took it from Gideon before he died. But Gideon was smarter than you. He made two." I walked over to the laptop set up on the side table. Connected to the speakers Rowan had rigged, I plugged the drive in. I clicked the file dated 2 months ago. The sound of static filled the room. Then, Connor's voice, crystal clear, arrogant. "She is perfect. Gideon. She is soft. She signs whatever I put in front of her. She trusts me. That is why she is the perfect scapegoat. When the house of cards falls, Mirith will be the one holding the match. I will be on a beach, and she will be in a cell. It is cleaner this way." The recording ended. The silence in the cabin was deafening. Connor looked at me. The mask was gone. There was no husband left, only a cold, calculating stranger who had slept in my bed for 10 years. "I made you," he whispered, venom dripping from every word. "You were nothing before me, just a boring little clerk. I gave you a life." "You gave me a lie," I said. "And you," he sneered at the officers. "You can't prove I killed the old man. He had cancer. He died of natural causes." "Did he—" The bedroom door opened again. Maris Rusk stepped out. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face, but she held her head high. She walked straight up to Connor. She didn't hit him. She reached into her pocket and pulled out an old, scratched wristwatch with a leather strap. Gideon's watch. She slammed it onto the table in front of him. "My father died in fear because of you," Maris said, her voice breaking. "He died thinking he had failed. But he didn't fail. He caught you." She leaned in, her face inches from his. "You gave him water," she whispered. "Sloan gave us the medical logs. The toxicology report from the tissue sample they saved is coming back on Monday. But we don't need it to know what you are. Today, you taste the fear he felt." Connor sagged. The fight went out of him. He looked at the watch, then at me, then at the handcuffs dangling from the officer's belt. "Cuff him," Detective Miller said. The click of the metal was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. They spun him around and marched him toward the door. As he passed me, Connor stopped. He looked at me one last time. "You will never be free of me," he said. "Every time you sign your name, you will think of me." "Get him out of here," I said, turning my back on him. I heard the door close. I heard the engine of the police cruiser start. I heard the sirens fade into the distance. Then my legs gave out. I sat down on the hardwood floor of the cabin. Sloan sat on the chair, burying her face in her hands. Maris stood by the window, watching the cars leave. Rowan came over and put a hand on my shoulder. "It is over, Mirith," he said gently. "You are clear." I nodded. I tried to say thank you, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, a sob ripped its way out of my chest. It wasn't a pretty cry. It was ugly, guttural, the sound of 10 years of love being torn out by the roots. I cried for the wasted time. I cried for the trust I would never get back. I cried for the woman I used to be, the one who believed in cooking dinner and signing birthday cards and growing old with someone. That woman was dead. Connor had killed her just as surely as if he had pulled a trigger. But as I sat there, wiping the tears from my face, I looked at my hand, the hand that Gideon Rusk had grabbed. It was trembling, but it was free. I wasn't Mie, the scapegoat. I was Myrith Ashmere, the survivor. 2 days later, I drove back to Briar Glen. The sun was shining, a cruel contrast to the storm inside me. I walked into Renfall Hospice. The smell was the same antiseptic and flowers, but I didn't feel afraid anymore. I walked to the reception desk. The young girl with the pink nails was there. She looked up, surprised to see me. "Can I help you?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small silver key, E17. I placed it gently on the counter. "I am returning this," I said. "It belonged to Mr. Rusk, room 304. The girl looked at the key, then at me. "Oh, okay. I will put it in the lost and found." "Thank you," I said. I turned and walked toward the exit. As the automatic doors slid open, I saw a young man standing on the sidewalk. He was wearing a volunteer vest, handing out flyers for a grief support group. He looked tired. He looked invisible to the people rushing past him. He caught my eye and smiled a tentative, hopeful smile. "Take one," he asked, holding out a paper. I stopped. I took the flyer. "Thank you," I said. "You are doing good work." His face lit up. "Thanks. Most people just walk by." "I know," I said. "But sometimes, the stranger on the sidewalk is the only one who sees you." I walked to my car. I felt a strange sense of peace. Gideon Rusk was a stranger who grabbed my hand and saved my life. I would never forget that. The world was full of monsters like Connor. Yes, but it was also full of Gideons. I got into the car and started the engine. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I picked it up. It was a text from an unknown number. I thought it might be Dahlia, confirming the final seizure of Connor's assets. I opened the message. There were no words of congratulations, no legal updates, just a single sentence that made the blood freeze in my veins one last time. "You think Connor was the only one?" I stared at the screen. The sun glared off the glass, blinding me for a second. I looked around the parking lot. It was empty. I put the phone down. I shifted the car into drive. The story of Connor Whitfall was over, but the story of Mareth Ashmere, that was just beginning, and this time, I was the one holding the pen. Thank you so much for listening to this story on Amelia Revenge Stories. If this ending gave you chills, please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I love seeing our community grow across the world. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales of justice, and smash that hype button to help this story reach more people who need to know that the truth always wins.